Welcome to tonight. On behalf of the Australia-India Institute, I'd like to welcome you to Melbourne University and a talk on integrative holistic sciences, India's holistic sciences, and how best that it can be integrated with modern medicine. So, firstly, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panellists. We have a wonderful panel tonight, starting from the right-hand side, Dr. Craig Hassett, who's Senior Lecturer at the Department of General Practice and Coordinator of Mindfulness Programs at Monash University. Craig is very well known in medical circles, has spoken nationally, internationally, is an acclaimed author. I was very privileged to have Craig as one of my teachers and mentors in university going through Monash University, and it's very nice to be on the same panel as Craig today. Seated next to Craig is Dr. Tim Carr, who's joined us from Sydney this evening. He's come down. Dr. Tim Carr is a general practitioner specialising in Ayurvedic medicine, and Tim is going to talk to us about Ayurvedic medicine and its application in an integrative approach. If I go through all the accolades of all the panellists, I'll be speaking for an hour and a half, so I'm going to be very brief here. And sitting next to Tim is Leigh Blashki, who's President of Yoga Australia, developed Australia's first government-accredited yoga teaching program, the Advanced Diploma of Yoga Teaching. He has over 35 years' experience as a yoga teacher and 22 years as a yoga therapist. So welcome, Leigh. And Gautamji, who has just entered. Gautamji represents the Chinmaya Association, is going to talk to us about Vedanta, the Indian spiritual philosophy, and how it applies to health and wellness, and how it can also be integrated into modern medicine. It's wonderful to have you all here tonight. I can see many familiar faces, some new faces, some old faces. And we're going to have a very interactive discussion tonight. Welcome questions at any time. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to the panellists, and we're going to talk about different topics, starting off with prevention and then moving into more diseases and conditions. So there's three broad areas that we're going to cover tonight. So firstly, every science has its place. Secondly, the integration of the various sciences. And thirdly, ultimately, we just want medicine, whether it's complementary medicine or modern medicine. We just want medicine that works. So I'm going to start off with a short story, and this is when I was a young child in India on a holiday, and as some of us from the Indian subcontinent will remember, a lot of the children get little white patches on their faces, and it can be very difficult to get rid of. And usually it's some kind of a fungal infection or something like that. And so I had been off to see multiple different doctors in India, and nothing was making it go away. Till one fine evening, my mother's here tonight, my uncle's mother went to a tree and pulled off a berry, a fruit, and cut it in half and applied it to my face, and within a few days that little white patch had completely disappeared. So, you know, the Indian holistic science of Ayurveda, of yoga, meditation, is very ancient. It's been there for thousands of years. And the key with any science is applying it at the right time. The way that I sort of came into this field, and you might wonder why is a urologist standing here talking about integrative sciences. When I was going through Monash Medical School, Craig was one of my lecturers. One of our very close friends started complaining of some pain in the bone of his fibula, the fibula bone. And at that time, I think we were studying pathology and we were studying some of the cancers of the bone. And just jokingly, we've said, look, it's probably just an osteosarcoma, a very aggressive bone cancer. And in the end, it turned out to be an osteosarcoma. It was biopsied, diagnosed, and then he went off to have various treatments. The treatments were very aggressive, included surgery for an amputation, and that was followed up with chemotherapy. And every evening, I used to wander back to his house after university and visit him and see how he was going. And usually, he had the bucket next to him. He was vomiting and he was extremely sick. Well, thankfully, 20 years down the track, he's still alive and well with us. But during that period in his life and during our medical school, a friend of mine, I'll use the name Michael, told me that one of the reasons he's able to get through this is through the art of meditation. And I didn't know anything about meditation at that point in time. I think I had been along to one talk by Swami Chinmayananda when I was about 10 or 12 years old. But Marty said that he used meditation and imagery and visualization to help him through the chemotherapy. So that was one of my first exposures to an integrative approach. So every science has its place. Just to use another story, Recently I had a patient come into the hospital, to the Epworth Hospital Emergency Department with blood in his urine, had a CT scan, and he clearly had a kidney cancer on the CT scan. And he is a meditation practitioner, and he refused to believe that this was a kidney cancer. He said, look, I know in my meditations that this is an infection, it's not a cancer. And he decided, I'm going to cure this lump with meditation. So he's gone away and he's been meditating on it. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed in size at all. And he's now gone and had a biopsy, and it's proven to be a cancer. So look, every science has its place. There's a role for meditation, there's a role for surgery, there's a role for Ayurveda. Now, just because these ancient sciences have been around for thousands of years doesn't mean that they're all correct. There can be a lot of myths, there can be a lot of superstitions that go along with it as well. And so just because they're old, it doesn't mean that we accept them blindly. They still have to come under the scrutiny of modern medicine. They still have to come under the scrutiny of modern scientific parameters. So these things are occurring in various parts of the world. In India, some of the yoga universities, such as Prashanthi in Bangalore, the Kaivalya Dharma, a close friend, Dr. Ananda in Pondicherry, is doing some wonderful research. The Maharishi University, and Tim will talk about that. They're all doing research, but it's taking time, and it'll take a lot more time before it starts being accepted more. However, we're lagging a little bit behind in Australia. If we compare ourselves to America, hospitals such as the Mayo, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, they all have integrative medicine departments. They're all studying complementary therapies, whether it's Ayurveda or meditation or nutritional supplementation. So we have a long way to go in that respect. In terms of integration, I think the public have voted with their feet. It's now time to start breaking down the barriers. And the barriers and the compartments that I've seen in my 20 years as a doctor, as someone who's been interested in complementary therapies, is you have the medicos who are in their compartment, who are very sceptical and refuse to believe that anything outside of their medical paradigm. You also have the naturopaths, the natural therapists, and I know when my wife was going through a naturopathy training, she used to tell me stories about students who are so anti-doctor and so anti-medicine. And then people who are on a yogic and spiritual path can often be very blinkered as well. So it's now very much time to start breaking down those barriers so that doctors become more open to natural therapies, natural therapists become more open to conventional medicine, yoga practitioners become more open to other things as well. Now, all of you, I'm sure many of you would have tried yoga and meditation, and as I said, the public have voted with their feet. People go to a yoga class or they try mindfulness and they feel the benefit. They don't necessarily need a randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial to prove that. The first aim of any medical science is prevention, and India's holistic sciences with yoga, with meditation, with Ayurveda has a wonderful role to fill in terms of prevention. But in my opinion, the role has to shift further from prevention and preventative medicine into promoting a path of wellness. So it's very easy in general practice setting to say things like avoid smoking, to moderate alcohol, to start doing exercise and to reduce obesity. But taking that one step further into actually promoting a wellness model where people start to achieve greater senses of energy and vitality, that, in my opinion, is the next step. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we just want medicine. It doesn't matter whether it's Eastern medicine, Western medicine, Indian medicine or African medicine. We simply want medicine that works. Let's not be naive about disease. Disease happens for all kinds of reasons. We can take the very best care of our health, have a good diet, can exercise, but sometimes these things are just sporadic and happen out of the blue. And I see it every day in my clinical practice. People who've lived a good life, lived a healthy life, who are struck down with a kidney cancer or bladder cancer, never smoked in their lives, never had chemical exposure to any of these agents, and develop a bladder cancer. So tonight we would like to discuss and explore how we can make use of an ancient culture that has a rich repository of health knowledge. So I'm going to turn over to the panel now, and the format of our discussion is going to be quite interactive and free-flowing. Some of us are meeting for the first time tonight. We haven't discussed anything really. But we're going to start off with prevention and talk about prevention and health promotion for a little while before starting to move on to disease states. So we might start on the right-hand side with Craig. who's been so involved and pioneered meditation and mindfulness in the days when years ago integrative doctors faced a very hostile environment. Craig was at the front line. You can see that he's come through alive and well, thankfully. And so, Craig, I'd just like if you can tell us a little bit about meditation, some of the evidence for meditation and mindfulness, and how this can be integrated into clinical practice.
Yes, when I was a medical student studying a few hundred yards from here, there wasn't a lot on meditation back in the 70s. There was little bits and pieces around about the relaxation response. Herbert, all right. There were bits and pieces around the relaxation response, so that the blood pressure drops, or that there's a relaxation of muscle tension, effects on adrenaline and cortisol and so on. And all of that was very interesting, and it was pretty much the opposite of the stress response. But that was really only a first step. And things sort of chugged along for a while, but in more recent times, as the science of mind-body medicine more generally opened up, and psychoneuroimmunology, and all of these related sciences, then there are a lot more avenues to study a much deeper effect of meditation. So not just its effect on some isolated biochemical or physiological endpoint, but actually what's the effect on a particular condition. And then with the neurosciences, what's the effect on the brain? What's the effect on immunity? Now, what's the effect on genetics? And in all of these kinds of areas, when the studies started to come through, probably the single biggest catalyst for the explosion of interest in meditation research in the last 10, 15 years has been the research that's come out in the early 2000s looking at the impact on conditions like depression. Because as you may or may not be aware, depression's in the process of overtaking heart disease. It's the developed world's number one burden of disease. And if the trends over the last 50, 60 years continue for another 10, 15, it's going to be way out in front as the developed world's number one burden of disease. And antidepressants are not turning that Titanic around at all. In fact, they're hardly even putting on the brakes. And when the research came out, using what the wisdom traditions had to say about the mind, about awareness, about the relationships to thought, non-attachment, being in the present moment. All of these kinds of philosophical principles, if you like, were applied to management approaches for depression, and finding, well, people actually take on board these approaches. And mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, for example, the chance of relapsing in depression was just absolutely plummeted compared to treatment as usual. But that was a real catalyst for accelerating the interest in, say, the brain sciences. And mind you, I should say that meditation-based approaches have been used for a range of other mental health problems as well. So anxiety, and there's interesting new work on autism and a whole range of other things, substance abuse, etc. Then the brain sciences. So the research is very clearly showing that meditation changes the structure and the function of the brain. Now, it's been known for a long time with the early EEG changes that gave a rough idea there's something interesting going on in the brain, but now literally thickens the grey matter, stimulates neurogenesis. That's the stimulation of new brain cell growth in the adult brain. The adult brain was not meant to be able to do that. The medical dogma was for about 100 years the adult brain doesn't make new brain cells. We now know that's not true. And meditation, particularly in the areas of the brain that get damaged by stress, memory centres, executive functioning areas, meditation adds on new brain cells, improves the functioning of those areas, quietens down the stress centre, the amygdala, and so on. So there's all of the brain sciences. The therapeutic effects, managing severe chronic pain, effects on immunity and reduced days off with sick leave, for example, with respiratory infections, facilitating healthy lifestyle change. So there's a whole range of therapeutic applications that are now being used either as a single treatment or as adjuncts to other treatments as well. Now there's a lot of interesting work with leadership development, so mindfulness seems to be very important in helping to develop the qualities associated with good leadership. Empathy and communication, research on health practitioners. A lot of this is published in the world's leading journals. Journal of the American Medical Association, mindfulness training, for example, having an effect of improving empathy and reducing burnout, improving mental health and clinical performance, communication patterns in, say, physicians. So there's that whole area as well. and improve cognitive function, which is, executive functions. And some of the most interesting work now is going on in genetics. And an Australian Nobel Prize winner by the name of Elizabeth Blackburn, and some of the work that her and her lab have been doing, showing that mindfulness and meditation training, including yogic forms of meditation as well, stimulate the repair enzymes in the nucleus of the cell and slowing down the rate of aging on the level of the DNA. Other studies on meditation, when looking at the genetic levers and switches that control immunity, it's actually changing the genetic levers and switches away from inflammation and towards positive immunity. It's actually having effects on levels that couldn't have even been conceived of when it was just, it's physical relaxation. It's just dropping a little bit of the adrenaline and so on. It's gone way past that. And and heaven only knows where it's going to go next. So it's actually the endpoints of treating these kinds of conditions, not just making a change, but actually those kinds of endpoints that are really creating a huge amount of fascination.
So not just in prevention, but in many disease states, meditation has a role proven and some that are yet to be proven.
Yeah, I think too, one of the interesting areas as well, I think the mind is the most crucial thing in health. Because if we don't get the mind right, we don't get anything else right. And I don't just mean that because the mind has direct effects on our immunity and on our genetics and on our physiology and on our metabolism and so on. I also mean that because the mind is what decides what we put in our mouth in terms of what we eat, whether or not we exercise, and what we put into the environment. So for me, what's going on the planet is also a mind-body interaction. And an unconscious mind, an undiscerning approach to life, and we destroy the environment as well as our own health. So the mind's the most crucial thing. If we get that right, it makes a lot of other things possible. And the most important thing, I think, in helping to develop that capacity is through meditation. That's the most single useful thing that we can do.
So just staying with the trail of prevention and meditation, wondering if we can hand over to Tim. And Tim is also an accredited, trained transcendental meditation teacher. So as many of you will know, transcendental meditation, swept the world with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and became famous with the Beatles practicing meditation as well. So Tim, wondering if you can say a little bit about transcendental meditation and then move into Ayurveda and the Ayurvedic approach to prevention. Firstly, how many of you know about Ayurveda? Everyone knows about Ayurveda these days. So Tim, just over to you to talk about transcendental meditation and then moving into Ayurvedic approach to prevention.
Yeah, thanks, Ranjit. Yeah, so from the Ayurvedic point of view, health is a natural phenomenon. To be healthy is just a natural phenomenon that doesn't require any input from us apart from not interfering with what's natural. The whole process of becoming healthy from an Ayurvedic point of view doesn't require much more than, as Craig mentioned, becoming more connected with who we are, with ourself. The term for health in Ayurveda is swasta. Swa means self, star established. So being healthy is just simply a matter of being established in who we are, in ourself. Being unhealthy is a result of being disconnected from ourself. So the self is the source of everything. And that's why meditation is such a key to the all the health sciences, as Craig pointed out. With regard to transcendental meditation, I guess, differs from other meditations in that in transcendental meditation, the mind is allowed to effortlessly transcend the actual process of meditation. And the mind naturally experiences a state of being where the mind expands beyond time and space and experiences this experience of inner silence, of wakefulness. It doesn't require any attempt to control or to bring about any particular effect, say with Vipassana or the Zen techniques. There's an attempt to maybe create compassion or loving kindness, some cognitive skill like that, which is associated with some development of the cortex associated with that. It doesn't involve the actual process of observing thoughts and experiences that come in and out of the awareness, as does mindfulness. It's simply a tool to allow the mind to transcend all sensory input, all thought, and simply be. And that state of being, from the Ayurvedic point of view, is the start of it all. From consciousness comes matter. And this is something that's not too out of step with what modern physics is telling us. Max Planck, who's the grandfather of quantum field physics, maintained that consciousness was primary. Matter was a derivative of consciousness. In the body, in the whole of nature, things on the surface are very dynamic, they're very complex, they're very diversified. But as we go down to more microscopic levels, we find things become more simplified, more unified, more silent. And at the base of it all is the self, is consciousness. And consciousness, Maharishi points out, Maharishi is the man who introduced the art of transcending. He pointed out that in consciousness is a flat state of being, a flat state of a field, if you like. But when in that process of being conscious, then there's threefold structure comes into being. It's just a concept, but it's the nature of consciousness. There's some aspect of consciousness that is knowing, that is the observer. There's some aspect that's being observed, that's a known, and then there's a process of interaction between the two. So these in Vedic terms are known as Rishi, Devata and Chandas. The knower, the known, and the process of interaction between the two. And this threefold structure is reflected on all levels of manifestation. There's a sequence of manifestation from the self, through ego, emotion, intellect, mind, senses, body, and the whole environment. So there's a threefold division that we can find on all levels. In Ayurveda, they're known as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Is everyone familiar with those terms? So Vata relates more to the Rishi, to the knower. It governs all movement of mind and all movement of matter and energy. Pitta relates to the process. It's the process of transformation. It's what generates energy. Breaks down whatever comes into the system and makes available energy. Kapha is to do with the known. It's more objective. And that's to do with structure. It's to do with building up tissues, fluid balance. So in Ayurveda, we focus on getting the balance right. So prevention is all about ensuring that these three are working together. Maharishi gives the example of the children. The three children play well together if mum's at home. If mum's not at home, then they start to play up and fight and so on. So mum's at home means that we're fully conscious, we're established in ourselves. When we lose that contact, we lose connection with ourselves, then the children start to play up. This process in Ayurveda is called pragyaparad, the mistaken intellect, where we forget who we are and become identified with a particular situation. Maybe it's tax time, and we're totally focused on trying to save our money from the tax man, and we forget to eat at the right time. We forget to go to sleep, and we start to get into habits that start to get imprinted in our physiology, and as a result, impurities build up. Or it may be that there was some problem with our relationship. We started to become depressed. Or we became too intent on one thing. We just got so involved in that particular thing that nothing else mattered. So these are three different types of modes that we can get into when we lose ourselves. One, we become excessively worried. That's the Vata mode. One, we become too intent, too obsessive. That's the Pitta mode. The other is we become cut off. We become withdrawn from the world. That's the Kapha mode, the depression. So it starts at that level, and then it's reflected on different levels of our physiology. So a Vata imbalance would be if there's irregularity in the motion of our bowel, for example, our breathing, arrhythmias, central nervous system problems. They're all Vata problems. Pitta problems are if there's too much acidity, too much pitta or heat in the liver or the eyes, the skin. Kapha problems are related to heaviness, too much of that, the heavier elements, so obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, mucus problems. So the disease starts to manifest from the level of disconnection from the self, emotion, mind, and body. And there are 6 stages of disease identified in Ayurveda. In modern medicine, we identify the last 3 from the point of that the disease starts to manifest. In Ayurveda, we identify these doshas, this Vata, Pitta and Kapha, in its earliest stages of accumulation and aggravation and spread. So this is the ideal of prevention. If we can identify and pick up imbalance at an early stage, and this we do primarily through the pulse. The pulse is a wonderful tool that I recommend all physicians to master, and it doesn't take long, but that way you get to know your patient from the inside out. And the patient also feels it too, that you connect with them on a very deep level. And it can be actually used as a healing art in itself. So by assessing a patient in this way, we're able to see where they're at in that spectrum from disease manifestation. And then we're able to utilise or advise them on the correct diet or how they should be looking after their mind, or how they should be looking after their lifestyle. The very simple changes can be all that's necessary at that early stage. Once it's developed to the point it's a very gross imbalance, a cancer or an autoimmune disease or whatever, and it takes a lot more effort from the doctor and the patient to get on top of it. So it's much wiser for the doctor to handle things at the early stages. And so I find in my medical practice there's no conflict in doing both. And patients are always coming in. They generally don't come because they're well. They usually have some motivation, and the guys usually have their wife to bring them in because they're reluctant to admit there's anything wrong with them. But generally we can always find when they come with some particular complaint that there's something we can also offer from a more holistic point of view to help them to prevent that problem coming up in the first place. And not just that problem, but many other problems. And that's the beauty of working at this more fundamental level of the physiology. Just a few manipulations there, and then everything else falls into place. Even problems that the person didn't even tell you about, they come back and say that my skin problem's cleared up now, or my bladder problem's cleared up. Just by operating at that level. And this is what holistic medicine's all about. Working at that level, at that interface. This is before the genetic level, as Craig was pointing out. We're working at that interface between mind, body and spirit. And if we can get the balance right there, then that's the essence of prevention. That's the essence of health promotion. That's how we make a patient well, by connecting them at that level, connecting them to themselves. And when mum's at home, then everything else is balanced.
Tim, I'd like to come back to you in a second on prevention and Ayurveda, specifically in relation to digestion, and 4 or 5 practical tips that people can take away today, simple changes that they can make in their lives on a prevention and health promotion side.